Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is Saturday at about 12:30. Pretty snowy day. We've had a pretty non-existent winter, but I guess the I don't know, the gods of winter are still present. I don't know. We're into almost a week into technically a week into spring, but we're getting quite a bit of snow. We're posting about 6 inches, and it's currently snowing pretty heavily out there. So yeah, it's nice to have some snow. So today's show is on a special, well, kind of a special show. I kind of covered this movie before, um, and but I wanted to revisit it. I wanted to do a second review, and I wanted to kind of do it where this show was going to be just about this movie. A few years back, I got, I have a pretty decent collection of combo packs that I've gotten on Blu-ray, and mostly where you can go to Bull Moose and buy these really awesome combo packs of exploitation movies. You get like two or three movies, for the price of one. And I have quite a few of those kinds of collections. I actually have a lot of DVD collections also. And the DVD ones that I have are usually the quality isn't very good, the transfers aren't very good, but some of them are really good, and I have acquired some really awesome movies by buying them that way. And last year, I did a bunch of reviews on some movies that I got through Opera House Video. When Opera House Video is the really the only mom and pop video rental place in Maine that I know of, and they have these big sales every 5 or 6 months, and it's pretty fantastic. And I've gone to both of them, and I basically bought a shit ton of movies, quite a decent amount of Blu-rays, but mostly DVDs. But I bought a bunch of those combo packs, like horror combo packs, where they'll have two or three movies, and I have found some just amazing, exploitation gems in the bunch in the lot. So I've done shows on a lot of those movies, and I going to Bull Moose, which is my main place to go for movies. I have bought pretty decent amount over the last few years of the combo packs, but on Blu-ray. And I find when I buy the combo packs on Blu-ray, they usually come with at least two or three movies. The quality is pretty amazing. They don't always have a lot of special features, but some of them do. But the transfers are just beautiful, and so I always buy them, and they're always, these really ultra obscure and weird and bizarre movies. So I can't pass up the opportunity. So it was about a year ago I did a review on this one combo pack with these two exploitation movies that are just outrageously they're just outrageously out of control, and that is the Ravager and the Bushwhacker. And these movies are just completely fucking awesome and insane. And I did a review on this disc probably about a year ago, maybe more. It was a while ago, and I did it as a combo. I did it as a whole. I didn't do each movie individually, but I just watched. I've only watched this once since I got it, but I've been watching this again, and so it spurred on the idea that I want to do an individual review for both of these movies because I think they're pretty fantastic. So today's show is going to be on one of these movies, and that is the Bushwhacker, which is the one on the bottom. And this movie is bonkers, like it really is. The thing that I'm always taken aback by is the year that a lot of these exploitation movies came out. Essentially, this movie is a slasher movie too. And the most mind-boggling thing, like I said, getting back to when this movie came out, this movie came out in 1968, which is like crazy. It was directed by Byron Mabe. It's an American movie, and it's actually a fairly long exploitation movie. Typically for a lot of the movies that came out in the 70s, 60s, and the 80s, a lot of the like super dirty kind of low budget exploitation movies, a lot of those films, because back in the day, when you had the drive-in experience, or when 42nd Street was a thing, you would go and pay a ticket, and it would be like probably $5. It was super cheap, and you would go and you would see typically two or three movies back to back, and then there would be a bunch of trailers for a bunch of other movies. So you would have this whole like day or night of total immersion in film, and so that was commonplace. Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino, they did the whole Grindhouse thing a few years back, where they tried to kind of bring that back, where they show two movies, and with those two movies, you get a bunch of trailers. And that movie, as far as from a financial perspective, that whole like project or that whole kind of thing died. It didn't make any money. But I was fortunate enough to go to that, and I saw it in the theater. I went to the Colonial Theater in Belfast, and it was one of the, for me, going to the movies is one of my, favorite experiences. And that experience, going to the Grindhouse and seeing both movies, Planet Terror and Death Proof, plus all the trailers, it was one of the most memorable and one of the most fun experiences I ever had going to the movies. But, when you think back in the day, 60s, 70s, 80s, that was commonplace. That was a commonplace thing of like, an event. You would see a bunch of movies, and it would be a full on kind of outing and experience. And if I had I've said it before, but if I had a time machine, or if that thing was, if it was possible to travel back in time, a lot, obviously there would be lots of things that I would probably do. Maybe some particular times, like historically, I'd want to travel to. But I think the first thing that I would pick, or the time period I could, if that was possible to have a time machine, the thing that I would go to, which would be definitely the first thing, would be to be able to go to the Grindhouse Cinema, to be able to go to, 42nd Street in New York City, in its heyday, and go to some crazed matinee of a bunch of movies, and just having that experience, like, just amazing. And that was all of that took place, before I was really a thing, before I really existed for the most part. But it would have been an amazing experience. So I watched the Bushwhacker last night, and this typically, like I said, typically a lot of the exploitation movies, because they made them really, really cheap for virtually no money, and they would be tacked on to like this bill when you would go to see them back in the day. A lot of the films were on the shorter, scale, like maybe an hour and 20 minutes or so, or even an hour and a half would be a lengthy film for a lot of those films for back then. But this movie's pretty long. This is actually almost 2 hours. It's an hour and 85 minutes. So it's kind of long for an exploitation movie. And it stars Dan Martin, Mercy Montello, and Barbara Klein, and Harvey Shane. And it came out in, again, 1968. And the movie is essentially a slasher movie. And it takes place in this kind of desert environment. The location and the atmosphere for this movie is super cool. And it's basically centered on this kind of crazed, rapist, murderer, torturer, slasher killer guy who kind of lives in this desert. And there's a small plane that is flying, and he actually shoots. There's a whole thing of where he shoots the plane down with his gun. He has various, instruments of death and torture. He has he has a lot of guns. He has a whole bunch of knives. He uses ropes, and pretty sadistic person. But he shoots this plane. It's a little mini plane, and he shoots it out of the sky, and it's filled with like 5 or 6 people. And so basically, the premise of the movie is he shoots down the plane, and then he goes and hunts these people down one by one. And again, there's it's a super sleazy movie. It was my second time watching this movie, but it's ultra sleazy. There's all kinds of nudity. There's lots of lesbian sex in this movie, which I forgot about for some reason, and it's amazing. The kills are really great. It's actually at times a little bit hard to watch because it's not really the kills per se, but there are these scenes of where the bushwhacker, captures these women and basically tortures them, and it's brutal as all hell. And there's multiple scenes of where he's like tying these women to trees and like cutting them up and beating them up, and it's pretty brutal. But again, the movie is so terrible and so awful and so trashy that it it kind of relieves. It almost acts as a where you kind of get some relief from the harshness of the movie, the harshness of kind of the reality of the movie, and it's super silly and goofy and super campy. So it does have, even though I wouldn't say this movie is a comedy, but it definitely has such a silly, schlocky factor that it does kind of lighten up the impact of kind of some of the brutality of this movie. There's one scene in particular that is really brutal, and I totally forgot about that. And I was just like, oh, when I watched this last night, I was like, oh, damn, they really did that. And again, it's one of those things where I am blown away when I see, when the movie was done and it came up and it said that, it came out in 1968. It's wild, it's wild how ahead, really when you take, because it's definitely a horror movie, but when you take the horror genre, into itself, and obviously most of the slasher movies and some of the most iconic horror movies, they're always kind of picked out, out of the decades of, like, say, the late 70s or especially the 80s. The 80s was the, kind of when it exploded. It really, from like 1975 or so all the way up until like 1988 or so. That was kind of the apex of the slasher genre in the world of exploitation. Like, it really exploded. But and they became very, very popular. Movies that, say the Halloween, obviously the Halloween franchise, and then the Friday 13th franchise, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. You had in the Nightmare on Elm Street films. All of those movies are probably the most talked about. But again, my favorite thing is, like, if you're into a style or a genre, to kind of like take a deep dive and trace it back to where, the origins. Where did this crazy thing come from, or where did this unique, art form, if you would call it art, come from? And so when I discover a lot of these crazed movies, and when discovering this movie, the Bushwhacker, and seeing that it came out in 1968, and when you think of, like, say, the first Friday 13th, which came out in like 80, this movie is like, almost 20 years ahead of that. And that Friday 13th, the original, was my first recollection as a kid of seeing a slasher movie where a group of teenagers that are having sex in this remote place, in the woods, or in this cabin in the woods, or by the lake, by a lake area, or in the lake area. There's a masked killer who essentially just picks off each person one by one, and then you have the big, kind of more or less the plot reveal at the end of who the killer is. So you have the violence and the copious amounts of sex, and the kind of the campy aspect. the typical traits of slasher movies. And so discovering something like this, it's like, holy shit, this really is, the style of the exploitation horror genre, and especially the slasher genre, really is much more wide in scope and goes back pretty far. And I love that. I love that discovery of seeing, wow, okay, that wasn't the first movie that made, that this wasn't the first slasher movie. Oh wait, there's this other totally weird movie that predated it by 15 years. So it's super cool. Like one, for instance, I've talked about it before. Overall, I think pound for pound, the most important slasher movie ever made that really, acted as providing a blueprint as to what a slasher movie is Black Christmas from Bob Clark, and that came out, I believe, in '73, and so that acted as this massive kind of framework. And I've always said that Black Christmas was not the first slasher movie. I think it was the first one that really uh, came into its own. Like it really laid out the groundwork and a blueprint as to like what a slasher movie is. With those tropes. Even though that movie acts more, I think really at face value that movie acts more in some ways, even though it's definitely a slasher movie. Um, I think the framework, the core essence of that movie is definitely a slasher movie, but the kind of the exterior of that movie, the skeletal thing of that movie, I feel it's more almost in line or in step, say, with like a Hitchcock film. It's very suspenseful and very atmospheric. But again, like I said, that I think that's the most important movie because it became this formalized, way of, of what a slasher movie is. But I've always said too that it was not the first slasher movie ever made. Like there were a lot of movies that came out before that were slasher movies or that really had, you know, that those tropes going for it. Where you have like the masked killer, you have teenagers that are getting picked off one by one, copious amounts of sex, those kinds of things. And I think the Bushwhacker is an example of that. That is, it's definitely a slasher movie, but again, it predates most movies out there that are considered slasher movies, so it's pretty wild. And this movie is also put out by Something Weird, which is an amazing company. Something Weird is an amazing company that has put out all kinds of wonderfully sleazy exploitation movies over the years. They've done a lot of the combo packs. Dave Friedman, who worked with Herschel Gordon Lewis, was very much involved with those editions. Just amazing stuff. But the Bushwhacker is awesome, and I can't recommend it enough if you're into low down and dirty and nasty, super uber low budget movies. This is the one for you. It's definitely one of the most low budget movies I've ever seen. It kind of gives early Herschel Gordon Lewis movies like a run for its money, like say Blood Feast or you know The Wizard of Gore. Like it almost seems like this movie is even more low budget in some ways, and it's not really possible, but it's great. The whole like ending sequence of the movie where they use the credits, like the music. Again, that's one of the things about this movie is it's so grainy. Like you see all the cuts in the film, and it's so dirty looking. It's all choppy, and the music is just incredible. There's all this like kind of weird jazz music throughout the movie, and then there's a lot of like lounge jazz in the film. But it's just amazing. The music is so great. It acts as a character, and it has this super dirty kind of quality. and a weird juxtaposition because the music is kind of, I don't know, sweet and upbeat at times, but yet the sex scenes are pretty nasty and dirty, and the killing sequences are, the torture sequences are pretty nasty. So it's a cool juxtaposition, you know. And the thing that's really ridiculous and amazing with this film is at the end of the film where they show the credits, they have all the credits, who the film was directed by and the actors and the location. They actually, the filmmakers have it all written out on pieces of like this white paper, and they're actually hung in these trees, and you see, that's what you see as the credits. And I'm like, wow, like that's so fucking cool, you know. And they did it probably on purpose because maybe they couldn't afford to actually do it on, you know, on film, but it's so cool, and it just adds this extra layer of uh, coolness to the whole experience. So can't recommend this movie enough. The Bushwhacker, 1968. Pretty hard to find, I think. I've looked it up online and I found one little thing about it. I'm not sure if you can buy it. It might be possible. I'm not sure if you can buy it separate from like onto its own like Blu-ray edition. But this edition is amazing. It's the transfer is killer. Like it really is. When you consider how shitty this film kind of actually is, and it was given this, you know, immaculate restoration on Blu-ray, it's ridiculous, and I love it. So thanks again. This is Jason Dean, and we will see you next time. Peace.